Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. This is my work in progress series. This is series 1 in a new series I'm doing where I show you a big project that I'm working on and just work through it with you. So this first series is my Dresden Quilt series. It's like kind of an antique inspired quilt. I'm doing a lot of the detail work by hand, such as the hand stitching that I did in the last video. Then when I get ready to quilt it, I'm going to quilt that by hand as well. So I'll show how I work through that. So like I said, we're on series 1 and this is episode 5. So in this episode, I'm going to be showing you how I put together this sashing for this quilt. So that is these strips here. It was actually pretty fun to do. I quite enjoyed it because after doing all this hand stitching, my hands needed some rest, but my favorite part of quilting is just sitting at my machine and just being able to put pieces like this together quite easily because I get it all prepped, get all the pieces cut, and I get it all set up to just chain piece quite easily. And I love this part. So this was a lot of fun for me. So honestly, the hardest part to this piece, I think, was doing all the pressing because I found that it was quite a lot of seams that come together. So I really was careful on pressing them open because I felt like pressing them to one side, which is what I typically do, just put too much bulk in the corners. Plus, I know I'm going to be hand quilting this, so I wanted to have as few layers as possible when I get to that step. So yeah, so let's start working through these pieces. I'll give you the measurements of what I used in the steps and we'll get these sashings made. There's a lot of them, you guys, so let's get going. All right, so we're gonna start working on piecing together these little strips, Seminole piecing. And what we're going to do is we're gonna cut a variety of the same fabrics that we used on our Dresden blades. We're going to cut these strips into 2-inch wide strips of fabric going the length of our fat quarters that we had. So 2-inch wide. I'm going to probably start with doing one in each color that I have. And then from our background fabric, I'm going to be cutting 2.5-inch wide strips, and we're going to need double the 2.5-inch strips than the pattern strips that we're going to be cutting. So we're going to get these cut, and what we're doing is we're going to make 31 of these 10-inch Seminole pieced segments, and we're also going to need to cut squares to put on these corners here, and I'll show you that later. But right now we're just going to be working on making these strips that are going through here. We're going to actually be cutting 124 of these, so it's gonna be taking a bit of time. This whole quilt has been taking a bit of time, but I think it's gonna be really pretty, so I think it'll be worth it. All right, so I have my strips cut. So my patterned strips are cut. I cut 13 of them, and they're 2 inches by about 20 inches. I needed double of the background strips. These are cut to 2.5 inches wide by about 20 inches, and I cut 26 of them. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to be sewing these strips together. And so how we'll do that is just put a background on either side of it. So we'll have the pattern strip wedged between two backgrounds and sew all these. And what I did on my sample strip, and I'm definitely going to do again, because since I'm going to be hand quilting this, I need nice flat blocks. So I pressed everything open on the blocks, and it's really helped it lay nice and flat. So I'm going to do that on these. So after I sew all of these strips together, I'm going to press all of the seams open. I don't do that very often. It takes a bit longer. I have found that pressing seams open, starch is definitely my friend. So I recommend that. So yeah, I'm just going to sew these together and then press the seams open, then we'll be cutting them down for our sashing into little 2-inch strips. So let's get going. Okay, so you can see I have all my strips sewn together with the pattern strip down the center and the 2 backgrounds along the outside of the strip. So I already had one side with the seams pressed open. So I'm just going to show you how I like to press them open, because it's not really that fun. It's much easier to press to one side. So I always starch the fabric, and then I like to iron along each side of the seam, getting up close to where the stitching is. And I try to do it as gentle as possible, not really pressing, because you don't want to stretch out the fabric. So once I get along both sides right close up to the stitching, I start just finger pressing this open. If you have any fancy pressing tools like the rollers or anything like that, you could use those. I'm just pretty frugal, so I haven't purchased anything like that yet, but I'm sure it would come in really handy here. So after I just finger press it open, I just go along and push open that seam. I try not to, you know, push down too much and move the fabric. Just kind of gently press it. And then once I get it pressed open, I just press gently on the other side too, to make sure it's all pushed down. And that's it. So just go through and do that with all of them. Like I said, you could iron to one side. Like if your fabric background was darker, you could press out that way, press them both in, however you wanted to do it. I just, like I said, I have found from testing this out that it's really seems to line up and lay flat the best if you press them open, just because you're gonna have a lot of seams meeting up at the same spot. So I'm gonna go ahead and press all of these, and then we're going to be cutting these into 2-inch strips. Okay, now that we have both seams pressed open on our strips, we're going to cut these strips down into little mini strips. So the first thing you'll want to do is square up one side of them. And then we're going to cut them 2 inches wide. And we are going to need 124 of these. So just keep cutting all of them, because you're going to need to cut a lot. Now, as you cut these, sometimes see how it's not straight anymore? You'll want to square it back up so that it's nice and straight again. And then start cutting your 2-inch strips again. Okay, so If you've noticed that some of your cuts don't seem to be as straight as you thought they were, it's because as you go along, you may all of a sudden not be cutting it straight. And if you keep lining up with that piece that's a little bit off, see how that curves a little bit there? Then you may need to straighten them back out again. So I could go and trim off that other side if needed. Because when I sew these together, the more little pieces are off on them, the less lined up it's going to be. So just a little tip, if you've noticed that sometimes your pieces aren't as straight as you thought they might be, because it seems like you've been cutting them really straight and keeping everything lined up, but it can slowly get off because your ruler may shift a little bit as you cut, or the fabric might have moved. There could be any number of things, so just keep that in mind, that you can always square the fabric back up if you see that it's not straight anymore. Okay, so let me see how many I got from that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I thought I would get 10 from it, but I got 9. I did make 1 extra. So hopefully it'll even out. If not, I'll just have to cut 1 more and make another strip, but hopefully I get 10 from some of them, and I made that extra strip, so hopefully we'll be okay. So I'm going to keep cutting all of these, and then we'll meet back up and I'll show you how to put them together. Okay, so I have them all cut, as you can see, and we have a nice variety. So what we're going to do is start sewing them together in pairs of 2. And we'll want them to kind of be staggered. So like you see here, and you want that seam to meet nicely. So I like to bring them together and put a pin there to make sure they stay in place when I sew. Okay, so meet the seams up and put a pin, and then we're just going to sew along there. We're going to double them up. We're going to do pair them all up, sew them, chain sew them all at once. And then once we get all those doubles together, we'll press the seam open just like we did there, and then sew them all together in groups of 4, because we have 4 in our strip. Okay, so now we have all of our strips sewn together in groups of 2. So what you're going to do is press the seams open again. Like I said before, that is completely up to you. You could push them to one side or the other if you'd prefer. I just think if you press them open, they're going to lay a little bit flatter. So press all those seams open, and then you're going to start pairing them together to make the groups of 4. So let me set these to the side and show you what I mean. So we have the seams pressed open, and then we're going to be putting them together like so, and just fold them, meet up the seams. And it's going to depend on your preference on how you want to combine these together. You know, you may, like I'm trying to get them all where all 4 are different. It may not work out all the time, but I'm going to try to make a nice variety. So bring them together, the seams, and you're going to have
your pattern pieces offset. See how one will be on top of the other. And again, just like before, I'm going to put a pin there at the seam to keep them all nice together. So there is one pinned, and we're just going to sew along the seam just like that. See how we sewed along there? And now we have that group of 4. And then again, we'll press open the seams on all of those. So press it open. I always like to finger press it first and then bring the iron on it, because then I feel like I'm not pushing so much. So we'll get to that step. And then now you have your segment. Once you get that seam pressed open, it'll lay nice and beautifully flat. So here, we're going to need to change this into a 3-inch strip. So here's one that I have finished, and that's how it'll look. So that is that 3-inch strip. So I'm going to show you the easiest way to, well, I think it's the easiest way to get a nice and even 3-inch strip. So I'll do the math and find out what is half of 3 inches, and that is 1.5. So I lay my ruler getting the 1.5 line right across the points of my squares. So I line up the 1.5 on each of these 2, and this one here, get them all lined up. And you're not going to worry about these end points because they're not part of the seam allowance. And it is going to be off a little bit because you haven't got your seam across there. So just worry about the points that are in the middle. And then I'll cut across here, and you'll have all these little leftover triangles. And then I'll turn it, and now you have 2 points you can measure against, and I'll show you what I mean. You can get this line that you cut off, line that up on the 3, your 3 measurement, and then you can also check and make sure your points are still at the 1.5 inch line, and then cut that off. Okay, so now you have your 3-inch strip. So see how we have those? So now you might be wondering, okay, so we got that. Now how are we going to make this into a rectangle? So see here, I have one finished. Right? So how do we get that? And it is actually pretty simple. So our strips are 3 inches. So for seam allowance, I'm cutting 3.5 inch squares. So I'm just going to cut those in half. And what we're going to do is just lay them on the edges. I like to line up along my straight edge. So see how that tail hangs off? I don't worry about that. I just like to lay this across where the straight edge lines up, and I'll do that on both sides. And then we're just gonna sew across the seam, 1/4 inch seam. Okay, so I sewed the triangles onto the edges, and you can see it's already starting to become our rectangle. But you can see that it's a little bit larger than the segment we need. And the segment we need is 3 inches by 10 inches. And that is because we are using it between our 10-inch blocks that we made. Okay, so we need it to be the right size. And to do that is really quite simple. We're just going to cut it down to a 10-inch long strip. But we want it to be even, right? We don't want one side to have a longer width between it than the other. So what I did was I found the halfway point to be the middle of these 4 squares. So we want our 5-inch line to measure up here. And I use one side of this rectangle on the to make my straight line. So we want this to be 3 inches wide, right? And we have our 5 across the middle of the rectangle. So I have my 3 lined up, not down here, just along this part that we cut and know is straight. So 5 inches in the middle, and then I'm just going to trim off the side. So we'll flip it around and do the same thing. So I'm going to line up my 3-inch line along the side of this rectangle, and I'm going to put my 5-inch line along the middle of these 2 center squares. So get it lined up. Make sure my 5-inch line is across the middle. And then I'll just cut off the extra. Oh, I'm out of, see if I can bring you in. Move this down because you may not have been able to see what I'm doing. So I'm lining the 5-inch line in the middle of these 2 center diamonds, the 3-inch line along the side, and then I'm going to cut off the excess up at the top to make a 10-inch long rectangle. And there we go. So now we have 2 done. So I'm just going to work through all the rest of them to get these made. So remember, we're making 31 of these. So you just need one 3.5 inch square to make these last end pieces. So because you just need 1 square per strip. So you'll just need to cut 31 of those and then cut them in half to finish off these strips. So I'm going to get these all finished up.
Okay, so we have all of the sashing done. We got it all together. I have everything all laid out for how I for how I'm wanting it to look, and there is something glaringly missing, right? All these cornerstone pieces. So if you recall, I did a sample piece, and I was going to make it fit where I had kind of another like square and a square kind of diamond block in the center. So I was just gonna do one of these and get it set up for being a 3.5 inch square to go in there. And if I did it that way, I think it would be fine. But what really stood out to me, and God, I was like, I don't know if I want to actually do it, was how much space there is between there. I mean, since it would be even everywhere, on all sides there would be that gap, and it would be in each spot. I think it would still flow okay, but I was like, I don't want to get them done and then not end up liking it. So I actually think in the next video, in episode 6, I'm just going to be cutting this fat quarter into my cornerstones, just simple 3.5 inch squares. And I think with how much detail I already have in the blades and the diamonds, I really think just doing a simple block will actually give some rest to the quilt that's already getting pretty busy. And since they're all going to be the same color, it'll help tie everything together. That's my thought. So that's what I'm going to be doing in the next video, is getting these cut, and then we'll work through how we're going to piece the quilt top together. I still think I'm going to do a border on this quilt. It is getting a bit bigger than I thought it would, but I think I still have room for a border because all these, this is going to suck in a whole lot after all that seam allowance. I still think I want to do the border as this honey bun that I have and do kind of a piano key border. That's the thought. I still have a lot of the fat quarters left over, so I might, instead of using this, just cut those down, even though this would be a lot easier, just cut those down, since I still have so much left. But I'm not sure. I'm going to get the cornerstones in first and get the top piece together next video and just see how it looks, see how I feel, make sure I still want to move forward with doing that border, see what size we're getting to. So that's what we have to look forward to, you guys. Let me know in the comments what you think of the quilt so far. I'm really, really happy with how it's turning out. I did notice that some of my blocks I might shift around a little bit, because some of them that have the 2 blues that stand out a lot, some of them have 3 and 4, and they're kind of all clustered together near the bottom. I know you can't quite see it, but this isn't going to be the final layout. I think for when I piece it together, I'm going to get these up and take some pictures and really make sure I like how each plate is organized. But it's coming together, you guys. I'm so excited. So let me know in the comments what you think on the border. If you have any ideas for cornerstones, because it'll be a few days till I start working on it. So this video should be up and you can let me know if I should go in another direction. So thanks so much for watching. I appreciate each of you supporting my channel, and I appreciate all your comments. I love reading them. So thank you so much. And until next time, you guys, bye.